So by the end of today's session, you should be able to explain the nature and the rationales of government intervention, outline the instrument of government intervention, and discuss the consequences of government intervention. Finally, you should be able to explain how firms respond to government intervention. So this is the QR code for today's session. And I'll wait for a few minutes for you to register your attendance. Okay. Sorry. All right, so government intervene in international business to achieve social, political, and economic objectives, such as attracting FDI to increase job creation and promote GDP economic growth. So, for example, most countries' governments prohibit the export of plutonium and similar products to North Korea because they can be used to make nuclear weapons. So this is for security purpose. Yeah? And the government imposed trade and investment barriers that protect special interest groups, such as domestic firms, industries, and labor unions. So government intervention can alter the competitive landscape by hindering or helping firms' ability to compete internationally. So government intervention is an important dimension of country risk in international business. Okay, so can you hear me? Oh, good. Right. So government intervention is motivated by protectionism, which refers to the national economic policies designed to restrict free trade and protect domestic industries from foreign competition. So protectionism is manifested by tariffs and non-tariff trade barriers, such as quotas were mentioned in the last lecture, and arbitrary administrative rules designed to discourage imports. Okay, so government intervention, in fact, can alter the normal operations of economic activities within a nation by hindering or helping the ability of indigenous firms to compete internationally. So very often, special interest groups, such as domestic firms, industries, and labor unions, often convince the government to impose trade and investment barriers that benefit themselves. So for example, in 2000, the Bush administration imposed quotas on the import of foreign steels into the United States. So the rationale was to give the US steel industry time to restructure and revive itself, following years of tough competition from foreign steel manufacturers. So this move might have saved hundreds of US jobs. On the downside, however, higher tariffs also increase the production costs for companies that use steel, such as Ford, Whirlpool, and General Electric. So higher material costs make these companies less competitive, so reduce the prospect for selling their product in the global market. The steel tariffs were removed within 2 years. But as you can see, in the process of attempting to do good, the government also did some harm. Yeah? So government intervention often leads to adverse or unintended consequences. Okay? Because in a complex world, policymakers and legislators cannot foresee all possible outcomes. So protectionist policies often lead to price inflation because tariffs can restrict the supply of a particular product. And tariffs can also lead to or reduce the choice available to buyers by restricting the variety of products available for sale. And sometimes protectionist policies also weaken the competitiveness of domestic firms and industries. For example, in the early 1980s, the US government imposed quotas on the imports of Japanese cars into the United States to help insulate the US auto industry from foreign competition. So this move might have helped insulate the US auto industry for several years. However, in a protected environment, Detroit automakers had less incentive to improve the quality, design, and overall product appeal. So as a result, Detroit's ability to compete in the global auto industry was weakened. So it's very much like athletes who perform best when faced with formidable opponent. So companies fight harder to succeed when confronted with stiff competition. Okay. Now, question is, so what is the general motivation or rationale for government intervention? Why should government intervene in international business? What is the general rationale?
Prevent exploitation.
Exploitation by
employers against employees.
International trade. Yeah, international trade. It's in general. In general, yes, intervention, but that also includes domestic firms. Yeah. So think about the motivation, the general motivation for government to intervene in international business.
To make profits from the work.
Yes, stimulate economic growth. Yeah, that's a good reason.
To protect the domestic market. To protect the domestic market.
Yes, protect domestic firms and industries. Yes, that's another good point. Maybe you can discuss with the neighbors. Also, you could also think about the general rationale or defensive or offensive rationales. All right? Did anybody answer the question more? No, okay. So you can discuss with the neighbors for a few minutes. We'll go through the rationales together. Okay? Now you can put yourself in a position of policymakers or legislators. That's very quiet. If you are the policymakers or legislators, why do you want to intervene in international business or international trade? What is the motivation for you to intervene in international business? Or restrict free trade? Please.
So the general rationale is just to protect the internal small businesses and internal works against maybe the major corporates from outside.
Excellent. Sometimes, if a young or industry, put it that way, young industry or like small businesses, they often need protection to give it chance to grow and succeed. So for example, Japan has long protected its car industry. Yeah. So this is a so-called argument, the protection of the infant industry. Brilliant point. Any other ideas? Why should the government intervene in international business? I would expect some of you, after your graduation, you might work in the government or the trade department, yeah, or the Department of Foreign Affairs. So you should have some ideas at the very least. To prevent monopoly, yeah. So to stimulate a level playing field for all firms, ensure a level playing field or ensure fair competition. That's very important. So the ultimate motivation is to protect a nation's economy, right? Please.
Maybe some safety or environment concerns.
Environmental concerns, excellent. So it could be, government intervention can ensure the safety, security, and the welfare of their citizens, right? So for example, most countries' government might pass laws to prevent the import of harmful products, such as contaminated food. And they also control the level of environmental protection. Yeah. Any other ideas?
To protect the citizens from exploitation.
Protect its citizens from, yeah, that's another good example for ensure the security, safety of their citizens, right? Protect their citizens from exploitation. Excellent. Any other idea? Any other ideas? Okay, we'll go through them together. Now, the general rationale. So, government intervention or tariff and other form of government intervention actually generate a substantial revenue. Yeah, so for example, both Ghana and Sierra Leone's government generate nearly 25% of their revenue from tariffs. Yeah, and sometimes, as I mentioned, intervention can ensure the safety, security, and welfare of their citizens. And intervention is a means for government to achieve social, political, and economic objectives by designing regulations or policies that promote the development of homegrown industries. Okay, so finally, intervention can better serve the interests of domestic firms and industries. So, if we consider the recent dispute between Mexico and the United States over Mexican cement, so the U.S. government imposed a duty of $50 per ton on the import of Mexican cement after the U.S.-based cement makers lobbied the Congress. The stakes were huge because Mexican imports can reach nearly 10% of total U.S. domestic cement consumption. So Mexico proposed substituting quotas in place of tariffs. The two countries' government have negotiated for years to resolve the dispute. So these are the so-called factors in the general motivation or general. This is a general rationale for government intervention. So I think we also covered some of the points for the defensive or offensive rationales. So protection of a nation's economy we already discussed. For example, India imposed trade barriers to shell this huge agricultural sector that employs millions of Indian people. Yeah, protection of an infant industry we discussed before. We've gone through that. National security, for example, the United States prohibit the export of plutonium and similar products to North Korea because they can be used to make nuclear weapons. National culture and identity, for example, both Canada and France restrict foreign investment in their TV and movie industry due to foreign influence on Canadian and French cultures. So have you watched a French movie before? Yeah, so it's very long and rich. Some French movies could even last for 2 hours. And one of my French friends told me that in France, the movie industry is heavily subsidized by the government. So they have plenty of money and investment to make extremely long and rich film. And whereas if you think about, you watch a British movie, have you? You must watch before. Just in some cases, or some of the English movies, and they start and end always at the same point. So the storytelling is very much like a circle. And in fact, I quite enjoy this way of reading a story or watching a movie because you have a very strong logical coherence and consistency. But by contrast, if you watch a Hollywood movie, you watch the beginning, you know the end because the storytelling is very straightforward and simple, right? By contrast, if you watch a Chinese movie, so the storytelling is over twisted, right? So for me, even as a Chinese, I can easily get lost. But if you watch a Bollywood movie, as we all know, it's so passionate and full of singing and dancing, right? Whereas if we have any Italian here, no. But if you watch Italian movies, it's always intriguing and humorous. Yeah, so the movie industry is an important culture industry in each country, and it represents the national stereotype. So that's the motivation for government to intervene in the culture industry. Yeah. Another example, well, do we have anybody from Canada or the United States in this class? I can never tell the subtle difference between the American and the Canadian cultures. Even in the past, I lived in both countries for a long period of time, and I visited both countries very frequently before the pandemic. But still, I couldn't tell the subtle difference between American and Canadian cultures. Perhaps you can tell me if you know. No?
Canadian are friendlier.
More friendly than.
I live in the United States.
Yeah. Okay, that's interesting point that I will explore if I can return to the States next year, hopefully. Any other? No. Another example is Switzerland imposed trade barriers to preserve its long-established tradition in watchmaking. Yeah, Switzerland is famous for this. Yeah, right. So these are the so-called defensive rationale. Offensive rationale, national strategic priority. So sometimes intervention can help preserve or ensure the development of industries that bolster the nation's economy. For example, countries generate better jobs or higher paying tax revenues when they support high value adding industries such as IT, financial services, automobile, or even pharmaceuticals. Increasing employment. So intervention can help preserve local jobs, at least in the short run. However, protected industries become less competitive over time in the global market, leading to job loss in the long run. Okay, so these are the offensive and defensive rationales. Now, remember the instrument of government intervention we discussed in our last lecture. Can you still remember them? So you have tariffs, non-tariff trade barriers such as quotas and investment barriers, and subsidies, local content requirements and administrative practices and anti-dumping duties. So do you have any questions about this instrument? Now you must be able to explain this instrument for government intervention. Okay. So these are, although you might see it's quite dry on the slides, but in your daily life, you know, especially as international students, you go traveling to different countries, that you must see tariffs, right? And you might heard the news, you know, United States might impose anti-dumping duties on product imported from emerging market countries very often. That's very often the case. And you might also hear trade wars, yeah? So these are very important for you to understand, to be able to explain as a IB student, somewhere at least postgraduate level. Right, so what are the outcomes of government intervention? So one way to evaluate the consequence of government intervention is to examine, let's have a look before we go through this figure. So what I'm showing you now is a figure that illustrates the relationships between tariffs, world GDP, and the volume of world trade measured by world export. So the vertical axis on the left-hand side represents tariff in percentage, and the axis on the right-hand side represents the value of export in US dollars. And the horizontal line represents different years. So the blue bar represents world GDP, and the purple bar represents world export. And the red line here represents tariffs. So as you can see, average tariffs have been declining over time. But simultaneously, the world GDP, especially the world export or the world trade, has flourished. So what does this pattern indicate, or what is the implication of this pattern? There's a strong contrast between tariffs and world GDP or world trade. So what is the implication of this pattern or contrast?
The less tariff I impose, the higher GDP I get.
So there's a higher GDP and a greater the export, right?
With this tariff.
Yes, with decreased tariff, yeah? Yeah. So what is the implication think a little bit further. What is the implication? Tariff is a representation of controlling, yes, but for foreign firms, tariff is
obstacle for the growth.
exactly the trade barrier, yeah. So which means, whereas GDP is a measure for
Economic growth.
economic growth, yes. So if a country is better, well developed,
Trade liberalization.
Huh?
Trade liberalization.
trading organization.
Trade liberalization.
Trade liberalization, yes, yes.
So I think if tariffs are reducing and exports are increasing, then it means that trades are growing more, so more weaker.
Excellent. I mentioned, that's very good. I mentioned tariff is a measure for trade barrier, right? GDP is a measure for economic growth, but most importantly, economic growth represents the wealth of a country. Yeah? So which means decreasing trade barrier is a major factor in the growth of world economy and rising income around the world. So this is the implication, yeah? So decreasing trade barrier is one of the factors in the growth of global commerce and rising standard around the world. Okay? So companies actively participate in international trade, not only improve their own performance, but also contribute to reducing global poverty because they have opportunity to import products from poor countries to help them increase their income in order to get out of poverty. Okay? So this is the example of tariff, world GDP, and the volume of world trade. So one approach to evaluate the consequences of government intervention is to examine each country's level of economic freedom, which is defined as the absence of coercion, constraint on the production, distribution, and consumption of goods and services beyond the extent necessary for citizens to protect and maintain liberty themselves. So in other words, people are free to work, produce, consume, and invest in ways that they feel are most productive. So a level of economic freedom is published by the Heritage Foundation on an annual basis, which actually cover the level of economic freedom of 178 countries around the world. Yeah? So just for your own interest, this is the Heritage Foundation's website. You can have a look because it might be used for not only for your coursework in this module, but might also be useful for your coursework in other modules, as long as you want to examine the impact of government intervention on international business or economic development. Yeah. So according to this interesting index, in general, all advanced economies are free. Emerging economy countries are free or mostly free, whereas developing economies are mostly unfree or repressed. Okay, so economic freedom flourishes with appropriate government intervention, but too much intervention might harm the economy. For example, in 2010, the United States fell into the second highest category in terms of level of economic freedom because of increased federal government intervention in the nation's economy following the recent global financial crisis. And the UK, for example, scores especially well in terms of business freedom and property rights. So to illustrate the relationship between economic freedom and government intervention, or to illustrate how economic freedom flourishes with appropriate government intervention, and let's use the market liberalization in China as an example. So after establishing a Communist Party in 1949, China relied on centralized economic planning, and its agriculture and manufacturing were controlled by the inefficient state-run industries. So the country remained close to the international trade or international business until the 1980s, when they began to liberalize its economy. In 1992, China joined an important economic bloc I mentioned in the first lecture. Can you still remember? In 1992.
Asia Pacific.
Excellent. China joined APEC, Asia Pacific Economic Cooperation. And in 2001, China joined another supranational organization. Since most of you are from China, you must know, in 2001.
World Trading Organization.
Brilliant. So in 2001, China joined WTO and committed to reducing trade and investment barriers and increasing intellectual property protection. So the trade has flourished Chinese or stimulated Chinese economy. So by 2008, its GDP was 10 times the 1978 level, and the value of its export reached 1.5 trillion US dollars. So today, China has become one of the leading exporters for manufactured products and home to numerous emerging market multinational firms that compete with Western firms. Okay, so this is how economic freedom flourishes with appropriate government intervention. Yeah, so China actually moving from central planning, complete government intervention to a moderate level government intervention. That's why its economic development flourishes. Yeah, so there's a positive relationship at some point, but not to an extreme, between government intervention and economic freedom. Now I'm going to introduce a very important organization in international business, which is GATT or WTO. So in 1947, 23 countries signed the General Agreement on Tariff and Trade. So this is in fact the first major attempt to systematically reduce tariff or trade barriers worldwide. So the GATT has created a process to continuously reduce tariff through negotiations among member countries and the Forum for Resolving Trade Disputes and the Agency to Supervise World Trade. So the GATT introduced the concept of most favored nation, according to which each member countries agreed to extend the tariff reduction covered in the trade agreement with the trading partner to all other member countries. So in other words, a concession to one became a concession to all. So the GATT was superseded by WTO in 1995 and grew to include 150 countries around the world. Okay? And the organization proved extremely effective and resulted in the greatest global decline in trade barriers in history. Okay? So this is the WTO or GATT. The main role for WTO play in international business is to reduce trade and investment barriers and resolving trade disputes. Okay, so that's you need to know why we have WTO. Yeah. Okay. Sorry. Now the question is, now don't look at these slides, but if you think about, if you are a future regional executives or subsidiary managers of a multinational firm, so your firm is going to enter a new country. So what would you do to minimize the potential risk and the cost of host country government intervention?
Set up a branch in your country.
You can discuss with your neighbors. Let's take a few minutes and you can discuss how would you respond to government intervention if put yourself in a position as the regional executive or subsidiary managers. So your firm is going to enter a new host country, but you don't know anything about it beforehand. So what would you do to try and minimize the potential cost and risk of host country government intervention? So you need to engage in the discussion, because if you don't, it's very difficult to remember what we learned. If you interact and discuss with each other, you might remember for a much long time. People talk to each other, not just do something. Okay. Any answers? Any answers? How should firms respond to government intervention in the host country? Any answers? If you are a regional executive or subsidiary manager, your firm is going to enter a new market. So you know nothing about this country before. What should you do? This is a very practical question. And in fact, after you graduate, you might find a position, after some years, gradually you might be the future regional executives or subsidiary managers. And this is a typical problem you might encounter in the near future. Yeah? So what would you do?
Study the competition, the companies that know policies as in regards to what the government.
Excellent. So you need to get into do good research, yeah, about your host country's political background or policies or competition. So you need to scan every aspect, social, political, economic, culture, factors of your target country, yeah, in order to identify the nature of government intervention, right, and plan for your potential market entry strategies, right? So for example, the EU is devising new guidelines that could affect companies' operations, ranging from product liability laws to standards for investing in EU industries. So, as a subsidiary manager, if your home country is if your company is going to enter EU countries, you might have a look at this general guidelines, yeah, and to do a broad search about your target country in terms of social, political, economic, and cultural information. Okay. Any other answer? Any other answer? It's very loud when you are discussing, but there's no. Please.
Hire local experts.
Hire local expert. Excellent. So you could actually hire local, native local language speaker or someone who know how to do business in this country, right? That's the most straightforward strategy to go ahead with. Excellent. Anything else?
Attract local investments.
Attract
local investments.
Attract local investment. Excellent. So you could partner, right? Or collaborate with the local firm. And so you can gain access to local knowledge from your local partners. That's another excellent point. Yeah. So in fact, these are frequently used strategies for foreign firms to operate in emerging market countries or other countries. Excellent. You have brilliant points. Anything else?
Educate the employees.
Yeah, you need to have a training. Yeah, you need to train your employee if you're going to send them to your potential host country. You need to have staff training. That's another good point you must bear in mind. And how would you, in fact, very often to combine your expatriate with the local employees to work together and to facilitate knowledge transfer, the communication between your expatriate and the local employees is very important. So very often this is where innovation arises, because they have different knowledge background, different cultures, yeah? They learn from each other. This could stimulate new ways of thinking, perhaps develop a new product that's suited for both home and host country. That's a very important point. So pay more attention to the knowledge transfer mechanisms, especially the communication between your home country employee and host country employees. So you need to train, most importantly, train your home country employees to learn about host culture, host language, and religion in some cases. Yeah? Any other points? Any other answer? From this side, very loud, but I never heard any answer. Any answer? So what are you discussing then? Any points? Just go into the host country as what you do in your home country, right? There must be some difference. No answer.
Well, as they say, the first day you can hire specialists at the various companies who study the market.
Yeah.
And second one, normally when the the big companies gonna enter in an emerging economy. What they do is they talk directly with the government, so the government don't oppose to them. And just claim because they have to create certain policies to they're going to enter a new market, but the idea is not hurt the small business of the national business. So also because the government they will not oppose or intervene with them. So the idea is to have communicate directly with them and
Excellent.
accomplish the policy.
Yeah, that's a very important angle, very important point that you need to pay more attention to, especially you need to understand the nature or interact with the potential host country government. And sometimes firms could lobby the government, yeah, for their own personal interest or for their own benefit, right? And sometimes you could always take advantage of those government incentive schemes, right? Or other government support programs. As I mentioned, one of the motivation is for government to intervene in country is to attract foreign direct investment. So if the government wants to attract potential foreign investment, they might have a preferential treatment or incentives, yeah, to attract foreign firms. So the firm can take advantage of those investment incentive schemes and other local government support programs. So for example, when Mercedes built a factory in Alabama, it benefited from reduced tariffs and direct government subsidies provided by the Alabama state government. So by directly interacting with the host country government. Yeah? And when Siemens, for example, built a semiconductor plant in Portugal, it received subsidies from both the Portuguese and EU government. And in fact, the incentive covered nearly 40% of Siemens training investment costs in Portugal. Do we have anyone from Portugal? No, okay. There's one or no? No, nobody, okay. Never mind. So let's have a look at possible responses. So we have gone through the first point, research to gather knowledge and experience. And the other approach is choose the most appropriate entry strategies. For example, most companies might use exporting as their initial entry strategy in the host country, but if higher tariffs are present, so other entry strategies should be considered, such as joint venture or FDI with local partners, as we discussed before, yeah, which allow the company to directly produce in the host market. For example, the Japanese Fuji company had long exported camera film to the United States. Subsequently, Fuji built a factory in South Carolina to manufacture camera film, which allowed the company to avoid US tariff and effectively deflect the claim that it was unfairly dumping Japanese-made film there. However, even investment-based entry strategies could be effective if it requires the imports of raw materials and parts to manufacture finished product in the host country. You could always take advantage of foreign free trade zones. So by the way, do you know what is a foreign free trade zone, or can you think of any example of a foreign free zone in your own country? Do you know what is a foreign free zone? Or can you think of any example of a foreign free zone in your own country?
Duty free. Duty free.
Yeah, duty free, yes. Any example from your own country? Do you have any foreign free zone in your own country? So many of you are from China. And if you don't know, I don't believe it. Unless you're not from China.
We have in United Arab Emirates, there is the Jabal Ali zone.
Yeah.
It's like a trade, like duty free, but the big one we say this is free zone.
Yeah, excellent. That's a good example for free zone. So everything coming inside the zone are not subject to duty until product or services they come out of this area.
It's just like a storing area.
Yes.
Whenever it comes,
exactly.
Whenever it comes inside Dubai, we will pay for the custom.
Yeah.
Or else it will go to the other part of the world.
Yes, exactly. That's a very good example.
I think we have a bonded warehouse in every country
where when goods come in, we don't need to pay any tax.
Yeah.
We pay tax
Yeah.
when the goods come out from the warehouse and we put into the market.
Do you know where is that located in China?
上海、广东、福建、天津。
Okay, that's good. That's a good search. That's a good search.
Many problems.
Guangdong province. I know Guangdong province is very famous for the foreign free trade zones. Many multinational firms actually they sell their product or raw materials in that province. Yeah. Any other examples? Anybody from Mexico? Or in your own country, don't you have any? You should have bigger countries and tend to have. Unfortunately, there's no foreign free zone in the UK, unfortunately. But there are plenty examples of foreign free zones in countries such as Mexico, United States, and China. So the bigger the country, the more likely you're having foreign free zones. Okay? Right. A foreign free trade zone is the area in a country that imports raw materials or parts for assembly or other processing and subsequent re-export. So products brought into a foreign free trade zone are not subject to duties, taxes, or quotas until they or product made from them enter the non-foreign free zone financial or commercial territory of the country. Yeah. So firms typically use foreign free zone to assemble foreign dutiable materials and parts into finished product, or they use foreign trade zones to manage the inventory of materials and equipment and finished product that the firm will eventually need at some other locations. Okay, so for example, the Japanese car makers sell their vehicle at Port of Jacksonville, Florida, as a foreign trade zone, without having to pay duties until the cars are shipped to the US dealerships. Okay, so a successful experiment with the foreign free zone has been the Maquiladoras, which is the export assembly plant in northern Mexico along the US border. So Maquiladora actually imports raw materials and equipment on a tariff-free basis for assembly or manufacturing, and then re-export them. So today, under the North America Free Trade Agreement, Maquiladoras employs millions of Mexicans who assemble clothing, car parts, furniture, and other goods. Okay? So the foreign trade zone enabled companies from the United States, Europe, and Asia to tap into the local low-cost labor, favorable duties, and incentives, government incentive schemes, while serving the U.S. market. So Maquiladora accounts for nearly half of Mexico's total export. So this is the take advantage of foreign free trade zones. Okay. Seek favorable customs classifications for exported products. So one approach to reduce the exposure to trade investment barrier is to have exported products classified properly. Okay, so many products in fact could be classified under 2 or more categories. Okay, you need to, but each category might imply a different tariff. So you need to make sure the exported products are classified under the lowest tariff code. Okay, so we have already discussed this. Take advantage of incentive, investment incentives and other government support programs. Yeah. So obtaining local economic development incentives from both home and host country government is another approach to reduce the cost and risk of trade and investment barriers. Yeah, the examples Mercedes and Siemens already discussed before. Finally, you could always lobby. Yeah. As you ladies speaking there mentioned, you could always lobby for freer trade. Okay, more countries nowadays are legalizing their markets to actually create jobs or increase tax revenues. So this trend is actually based on the effort made by firms to lobby foreign domestic governments to reduce trade barriers. Okay, so for example, the Japanese have achieved much success in lobbying or reducing the trade barriers by lobbying both the EU and US government. Okay? And in China, foreign and domestic firms lobby the Chinese government to relax its protectionist policies that make China a difficult place to do business. So in some cases, foreign firms even hired former government officials to help lobby their former colleagues. But the point I want to emphasize is lobbying is not just a strategy for multinational firms to use in their emerging market host country. it becomes increasingly a popular strategy for these multinational firms to use in their advanced economy home countries. To give you an example, you know this company, Greensill, yeah? Greensill is a multinational financial service company based in Australia and UK. It was founded by this guy, Lex Greensill, in 2011. And this Lex Greensill was the former unpaid advisor to Cameron's government during the time while he was in office between 2010 and 2016, such a long time, right? Okay, so in 2018, Greensill hired Cameron as an in-house advisor to help the company lobby the UK government. So what Cameron did was, he first contacted his former colleague. I believe you all know this guy, right? Rishi Sunak, the chancellor. He's still in office now. So Cameron pushed his team to give Greensill access to a so-called COVID-related corporate financing facility loan scheme. He also approached this guy. Some of you might know if you are from the UK, you know him? Matt Hancock, the former health secretary, who is famous for his most recent scandal and the unsatisfactory job he delivered during the pandemic. So he met with Matt Hancock over private drinks to discuss the possibility for Greensill to gain access to a new NHS payment scheme. Okay? Although Cameron's attempt were unsuccessful, but his actions have sparked a wider conversation about the ease with which Cameron can lobby the ministers and the role private firms in lobbying the government. So in fact, Greensill filed for insolvency protection in March 2021. My question here is, now, although it's an example, but my question is, do you think know-how matters or know-who matters? Know-how means companies become successful because they have superior marketing strategy, or they have a strong branding, or innovative technology or product, or they have a closer relationship with customers, or a good, credible reputation as a socially responsible firm. So firms become successful based on their own effort. Now, know-who means a company doesn't have to make a great effort, or it doesn't have to have an innovative product or technology, or have a superior marketing strategy. It can still become successful as long as they have connections with government officials who can help the company gain access to a government contract or subsidies or preferential treatment in order to win new projects. So do you think know-how matters or know-who matters? Both? So raise your hand if you think know-who matters. Nobody. Only one. So raise your hand if you think know-how matters. Two. Only two. So what about the rest of you?
I think both.
Both,
Both
yes.
matters.
Yes. So raise your hand if you think both matter. Excellent. Excellent. So we need to strike the right balance. Yeah. Depending on the situation in the host country. If the situation in the host country is very corruptive, perhaps you would explore know-who. Yeah. By contrast, if you're in the advanced economy countries, so the corruption level is quite it's quite transparent. Then perhaps you need to focus on know-how. Yeah. Good. Very good. Now the final question. Why have import tariffs been declining over time? Think about what we discussed today and also think about what we discussed in the first lecture.
Because of globalization.
Excellent. Globalization. Think a little bit further. What results in globalization? What improves globalization?
They don't have to import most of the time because they are building their own countries of it.
Excellent. Brilliant point. So increasingly, companies can bypass tariff or trade barriers to foreign direct investment. Yeah. So for example, Toyota built a factory in the United States partly to avoid US tariffs. Any other answer? So what leads to globalization? I mentioned in the first lecture. What contributes to globalization? Simply look at further.
Integration.
Excellent. Regional economic integration leads to lower tariff, but again, it's only within the economic bloc. So for example, under the North American Free Trade Agreement, Mexico eliminated nearly all US tariffs, but maintains tariffs with the rest of the world. Okay, regional economic integration is another factor. Anything else? Think about what we discussed today. I specifically mentioned
The growth of the economy of each country.
yes. I introduced a very important organization in today's session. WTO, yes. So governments have reduced tariff or trade barriers primarily through WTO. Yeah. So these are the three key factors that resulted in the decline in import tariffs. Okay. So you can let's have a break for 5 minutes and come back. Okay. Oh, by the way, I have communicated with the timetabling team. So we now have two options. One is you just stick to your original timetable. We're gonna have lecture on Thursday next door, or alternatively, we can use this room from beginning until the end, but next week we have to use the other room. That's only time we use it next week for Thursday session, because they put somebody else in this room next Thursday. So that's plan A. Stick to the original plan. Plan B is we can use this room except next Thursday. So which plan do you prefer? Anything is fine, because you can't get lost because we're just next door. Even whichever room we use, you can just have a look. We know where we are, right? But again, you prefer to stick to the original plan or use the same room, but except next Thursday, well, use the other room. Original plan. Do you want the original plan? So raise your hand if you prefer the original plan. Okay, 2. Or the rest of you prefer using the same room except next Thursday. We need a decision from you. We respect your decision.
People don't care.
You don't care. Okay then. Because I respect you, I want to see your right to choose. But if you don't care, we don't care because it's just next door.
I think we can stick to the timetable and we can move there.
Okay then. So we just stick to the original plan.
Yes.
Okay. So deal.
Can we get the QR please again?
The
QR code.
QR code. Okay. Oh. So that's the reason I don't want to show the QR code. Once I did it, you will go, right? Some of you might go, not coming back. Huh? Sorry.
I'm trying to stay to discuss about my market. No, I mean exactly looks like your age. How about them?
Right, have you read your case? If you haven't, and you can start reading your case, yeah? And we'll go through the questions together. We have some additional content to the case. But before you read the case, I need to show you some videos. Okay.
The Farnborough International Air Show is set to take off in England on Monday. And for rivals Airbus and Boeing, that means one thing: sell, 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 and rack up billions of dollars worth of plane orders from airlines and leasing companies. Boeing, the world's largest producer of airliners, enters the event with the nose ahead, having delivered more jets and secured more orders than Airbus has in the first 6 months of the year. The 737 single-aisle plane has been popular, particularly in China. Even so, Airbus is on pace to make its target of booking more than 600 orders in 2014, even though buyers have canceled commitments for more than 200 jets this year. Total order intake for the makers of these jets is likely to drop off from 2013. No surprise, given the record haul Airbus and Boeing achieved then. The key race within the Airbus and Boeing battle is over the dominance of the single-aisle market, the backbone of global flying. Airbus has an edge in selling its newest plane, the A320neo,
Can you be a little bit quiet?
which was rolled out just days ago. Boeing was trying to close the gap, but its 737 MAX, the replacement of the venerable 737, is not due until 2017, 2 years after the A320neo is scheduled to enter service. Both planes already have more than 2,000 orders to their name and are poised to exit Farnborough with even more. How many more? Stay tuned.
The United States has threatened to impose further tariffs of more than $11 billion on EU products in response to subsidies Brussels is paying to Airbus. A list of products subject to possible new tariffs includes Airbus planes and related products in the aviation sector, but also food products ranging from swordfish and salmon to cheese, olive oil, and wines. The European Union, meanwhile, has sued the United States for subsidies paid to Airbus rival Boeing. The World Trade Organization says both parties have broken global trade rules. For more on this, let's cross over to Frankfurt and our financial correspondent, Konrad Busen, standing by. Konrad, tell us, who's right and who's wrong here?
Well, Christoph, as the WTO says, both parties have broken international trade rules. Both parties have been heavily subsidized over many, many years. And both parties haven't been too eager to implement WTO rulings over those years. But now it's the US administration which is changing the rhetoric. Robert Lighthizer, the trade representative, makes sure that, you know, those questions over airplane makers are mixed with the general American trade agenda, which is, well, an agenda of America first, whatever the cost, whatever the political fallout.
Conrad, Airbus shares reached a record high on Monday. How damaging is today's news?
Well, shares in Airbus at the moment this morning here in Frankfurt around about 2% lower. We should not forget that, of course, Boeing at the moment is in deep trouble because of the grounding of this 737 MAX airplane. This morning reports came in from Indonesia, where more of the families of the victims of this plane crash, Lion Air plane crash in October, are saying that they are going to sue Boeing. And from China, it's been reported today that a large leasing firm has put orders for this 737 MAX airplane on hold.
Conrad Busen in Frankfurt, thank you.
Okay. Other one. So, fortunately, we need to. So joining the competition is this company. I believe some of you might know.
Well, the C-Series for us is our entry into mainline. We've been the leader, and we are the leader in regional aircraft, turboprops, and jet. But now we're going into a bigger category, typically referred to as single-aisle jets. So we're getting in this, selling to airlines like Delta, American, United. In the past, we would have sold to their regional feeders. So for us, this is a big development. It's a category that we forecast will sell 7,000 airplanes over the next 20 years. And we've been developing this aircraft for 5 years. And now it's very exciting because all the parts are coming together, and we'll go to first flight in June. We feel that the segment of 100 to 149 seats is a category that they're abandoning. They used to build a lot of aircraft in this category, but if you look at their sales in the last few years, Boeing is only selling their bigger 737, called the 737-800. That's a 160 passenger aircraft, or Airbus is selling the 320, which is an equivalent size aircraft. So that's a category that has a lot of volume, but for Boeing and Airbus, they have other priorities. So we feel that this category needs an all-new airplane, and that's what we're doing. We're going to sell to the same airlines that Boeing and Airbus are selling. So yes, they view us sometimes as a competitor because we're entering a market that there are only 2 players today, and I guess they don't like to see a third player coming in, but we're addressing a different niche. And in the end, I think Bombardier can bring value to the airline. And for me, my customer is the airline, and really that's what's important to us. Well, we decided with the Lear 85 to make an all-composite airplane, and this is using a new technology. Most of the structure is done in our factory in Mexico, and this has given us some challenge to get this right from a production perspective. I mean, from a strength and structure perspective, it's going very well, but then putting this aircraft into production was a little bit more challenging than what we had anticipated, but it's going better and better now, and we feel that we'll be delivering these aircraft in 2014.
Okay, you can read your case now. Have you finished reading? Have you? No? Do you finish? Okay, good. So the first question, where do you stand? Do you think EU subsidies and soft loans to Airbus are fair?
Yes.
Yes?
Yes.
Yes, you think soft loans and subsidies are fair to Airbus? Okay. Why?
Because Boeing is an American company and European Union, they needed to make that some competitive company against Boeing. So they established Airbus and they supported them with the money. So that's why it's fair. Why it's just only monopoly with Boeing.
Exactly. So the EU needs to support Airbus in order to enhance their competitive position in the global commercial aviation industry, especially to compete with Boeing and to ensure a level playing field. That's an excellent point. Any other reason apart from that? Okay, you must have your own reason. It doesn't matter as long as you can justify your answers. Now, so what advantages does Airbus gain from free financial support from the EU government?
They pushed their R&D and they pushed their production.
Yeah,
they have the capital now.
So they support, they invest in Airbus, the government invests in Airbus. Anything else? Any other answer?
Exponential growth.
Yeah.
Exponential growth.
Yeah.
The company.
The financial growth of the company.
The company has grown exponentially given the financial support provided by the government.
Excellent. Any other points? Think about the soft loan. So usually when you have a loan, you do need to pay back, regardless you are making a profit or not. But in this case, Airbus only has to repay the loan if it makes a profit. In other words, if it doesn't make a profit, it doesn't have to repay the loan. Yeah. So our complaints about EU's government intervention in fact in light of Europe's long history of democratic socialism. Fair or not? Okay, let me explain. The economic policies based on democratic socialism actually are aimed at investing in public services such as communication, education, healthcare, and utilities. So commercial aviation is not a public service sector. Yeah? Okay, next question. Do you believe U.S. military contract with Boeing amount to subsidies? Raise your hand if you think it is. Only one. So it's actually not subsidies. According to the WTO's definition for subsidy, it must be a financial contribution provided by the government, and it has to confer a benefit. So in this case, payment is a condition. Sorry, performance is a condition for payment. Although Boeing receives government contract, it has to deliver the product or service in order to receive the payment. So it's not okay, not a subsidy. Okay. So have these type of payments provided Boeing with unfair advantages?
Yes.
Yes. And so, for example, if you think about Boeing partner with a Japanese company, a Japanese company received direct subsidy from the Japanese government. So Boeing, although didn't receive subsidy directly from the US government, but indirectly received subsidies from foreign governments, right? By partnering with foreign firms who receive subsidies. And also, if you think about the knowledge created in a government project, Boeing can use the knowledge created in government project free of charge. Yeah, that's unfair. Last question. Oh, sorry, the third question. Assuming Airbus cannot compete without subsidies and loans, is that likely that the EU will discontinue its financial support of Airbus? And is it in the EU's interest to continue supporting Airbus? Well, if EU discontinue financial support of Airbus?
Like at the end, the company must they must live by their own. They must prove that they can deliver without the subsidies and without the financial grants.
Now, commercial aviation industry is different from normal industry. So think about if you want to build aircraft from scratch. It's not easy for a single company to do that. It's not like you manufacture a car, you know. It takes nearly 10 years research and development in order to manufacture an aircraft. So think about the rationale for government intervention. So, or can you find around the whole world, is there any manufacturer without government support can build an aircraft from scratch? Is that possible?
Well, I think the EU will still continue to fund Airbus.
Yes. Yeah. And think about the rationale for government intervention to protect domestic industries and firms. And also, if you think about the general rationale for government intervention, Airbus essentially increase EU tax revenue, right? Increase EU's employment, right? And also EU's R&D activities actually creates new knowledge or technology that is of considerable value to the European Union. Yeah? And also, if you think about Airbus value chain activities, also attract foreign investment, massive investment into the European Union. And also, Airbus is a vehicle for EU's best practices and pride in the commercial aviation industry. Yeah? So Airbus, in a sense, enhances EU's position as a global player. So if it is in EU's interest, even if Airbus failed or doesn't make a profit, it's in EU's interest to continue supporting Airbus. The last question, in the event WTO rules against Airbus and tell it to stop providing subsidies as afterwards, how should Airbus management respond? And what new approaches can they pursue to maintain Airbus lead in the global commercial aviation, commercial aircraft industry? So just like the question you reckon, now if there's no support or stop the subsidies, what could Airbus do?
In my opinion, when you say WTO ruling or asking Airbus to not accept any subsidies from the European countries, you're basically asking European countries to not applying approaches to enhance its global position. So I think this is those two things are equivalent.
They're not equivalent. They didn't tell you cannot support it. They just say you cannot provide subsidies.
Yeah. Provide subsidies.
Yeah.
The extreme action to get out from the WTO. Okay.
She's saying that the extreme action that just to break up with the WTO and continue on their own, but this is the extreme.
Yeah.
Yeah, if you do that, there will be, severe consequences. Yeah.
I think
they're trying to manage as Boeing does, Boeing doing.
The German taxi you cannot provide subsidy doesn't mean you cannot support it. You can use other ways.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But the extreme one is
maybe. But in the context of this question, what can you do? If you can't provide subsidies, what else can you do? What else can Airbus management do?
they need to seek for different knowledge and different R&Ds, different expertise, but they need capital. So without capital, they will be delayed.
So what else can they do to attract capital in addition to receive direct subsidies? There's very obvious answer hiding inside the case.
Loans.
Exactly, you can follow what Airbus or Boeing do. Boeing just gained government contract, so you can still copy what you can copy what Boeing did. Since what Boeing did is not called subsidy, then you can receive government contract, right? Yeah. So anything else?
Public funds?
Public funds. Yeah, perhaps you can float it in the stock exchange to raise money, not from government, but from every one of us. Yeah, that's a very good, excellent point. Anything else? Do we have anyone from the operations management program? No. Something.
What is funding? Operation management?
Yeah. Yes.
Okay.
You are. Okay. Think about the outsourcing, value chain activities. So perhaps Airbus can outsource its R&D activities and manufacturing to low-cost countries to reduce the cost. Yeah. Anyone from marketing? I guess we have plenty. Yeah. From marketing perspective, what can you do? There's one concept that always mentioned by marketing people: diversification. You can diversify your market. You can perhaps diversify into the private jet sector. Yeah. You can diversify. Anything else?
The only problem is the financial means. We can manage to raise some kind of finance, as they say, it's like some mutual fund, whatever fund is it, we can do it. Then on the other hand, we can contract with the government to re-agree for the tariff or like any other. When we buy the tickets, for example, we pay VAT or connecting taxes, and we can reduce it into increasing the consumption, which is like increasing the
Yes.
yeah, like some kind of economic measure that we can do, like increasing the demand.
Yeah, stimulating demand
Yeah.
through government contract or.
No, it's not the true government contract. It can be anything. Like with the government, we can reduce the tax, which means like reducing the cost of it. Or other else, like we can do in the marketing wise and other things we can do it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Will they remain competitive?
Quantity.
Will they remain competitive?
Competitive. Remain competitive, yes.
Before the solutions. Before they have support from government, right?
Yes.
Taking subsidies.
Yes.
So with all these solutions, if they stop collecting subsidies, with all the solutions, will they remain competitive with volume?
Yeah, so you need to remain competitive before.
No, I'm asking if they will remain competitive with all the solutions.
Yeah, you must remain competitive with all these solutions, yes. So actually, there's one strategy we already mentioned in our classes. You can always partner with companies in the aerospace or defense industry, yeah, in order to stimulate demand, yeah. So diversification and also partner with firms from other industries. Okay, so these are the answers. So to summarize, you can diversify into new private jet sectors, for example, or you can partner with firms from defense or aerospace industries, and you could also do what Boeing did to receive government contract, or you could perhaps outsource your R&D or manufacturing to low-cost countries. Yeah. Right. Now the final question would be.
In WTO, it's always conducted like.
Sorry.
Government supposed to be separate from the.
Sorry, WTO government to be separate from. It's unrelated to this question, right? Okay. So the last question. Actually, during the competition, as I show you in the video, is this company, the Canadian Bombardier. You know Bombardier before? Have you heard of Bombardier? Yeah. So Bombardier is a multinational aerospace and transportation company based in Montreal, Canada, and it competes in the 249-seat segment, which is a niche that both Boeing and Airbus are abandoning. So, have you ever flew with Bombardier's aircraft before? Now, if you ever travel within the States, you're more likely to fly with Bombardier's aircraft. There's a manufacturing site in the UK. If you ever take the train from Norwich to London, you can actually see it. You see on the right-hand side. Yeah, on the travel direction, see it on the right-hand side. You will directly see Bombardier's name on your right-hand side in London, near to London, Ilford, based in Ilford. So next time when you travel to London, pay more attention, choose a right-hand side seat. You will see it. So the flight itself, interior is much better designed than both Airbus and Boeing because it's more spacious and the seats are more comfortable. As a tall person, I don't need to pay more money to obtain additional leg room. So this is Bombardier. Now just to quickly show you the latest models from both Airbus and Boeing. The latest Airbus 351,000 was launched in 2018. So on the left-hand side, and on the right-hand side is the latest Boeing 777-9 launched beginning January 2020. Now we don't care about the exterior, yeah. What we care most is the interior. So the difference is quite obvious, yeah. Airbus interior is spacious, while Boeing only care about the quantity, not the quality. They only want their aircraft to carry as many passengers as they can to earn more money. But Airbus strike the right balance to pay more attention to the quality of our travel experience, right? So you cannot imagine if you travel with Airbus for a long haul journey, you'll be squeezed. Yeah, as a tall person, you'll be squeezed. So now, here comes our final question. What is the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on the global commercial aviation industry? And how should Airbus and Boeing respond to this sudden hostile shock in the post-pandemic era to turn their business around? Do you think what is the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on the global commercial aviation industry? Think about the travel restrictions.
Stocks fall down of Boeing and Airbus.
Show down.
No, I was saying that stock.
Stock, yeah, stock goes down dramatically, yes.
But now it's recovering.
Yeah, now it's recovering, yes, gradually recovering, yeah. So the stock goes down means there will be reduced profit margins. Yeah. Any other answer?
Maybe they were about to get into bankrupt.
Yeah, you're right. Yes. So going to bankrupt means they might shut down some production facilities, and there will be worker layoffs, right? Or suspended productions. That's a good point. Any other answer? So there will be reduced profit margins. There will be worker layoffs and suspended or halted productions. Anything else? Think about travel restrictions. Would you be able to travel?
They can have many flights as before COVID.
Yes. So there will be reduced decline in demand. Yeah. Just to quickly show you the impact supported by the latest. So there will okay. So there will be a loss. Yeah, reduced profit and halted or suspended production, worker layoffs, increasing loans. Yeah. And decreasing demand. Now the question is, what should Boeing and Airbus do to turn their business around in the post-pandemic era? So we're gradually getting out of the pandemic. What should Airbus and Boeing do to turn their business around?
Seeking investment.
Seeking investment. Yes. Anything else? Any other answers?
Collaborate with other companies that can probably buy their services.
Yes, buy their service, buy other services. Anything else? Anybody do we have a so-called entrepreneurship and innovation program? No? Do you know this car? Huh? The Beast. Yeah? So this is a US presidential state car, the Beast. Remember 2 years ago, Trump sat inside the Beast to greet his supporters while he was still being treated for COVID-19 at the time. Yeah? So perhaps both Airbus and Boeing, they could innovate. And actually, the interior of the Beast is completely sealed to protect occupants in the event of chemical attack. So perhaps both Airbus and Boeing, they could innovate to improve the design of their interior and to, in order to minimize the virus transmission as much as possible. Yeah. So they could innovate to enhance the interior of their aircraft. Now, the last question: do you think what is the impact of the pandemic of COVID-19 on international business? Or put it in that way, do you think the pandemic leads to globalization or regionalization?
Regionalization.
Oh, why?
Because they had to stop trade and there was no communication or like transfer of materials, raw materials and processed goods.
That's an excellent answer. And also, if you think about travel restrictions, delay in supplies, these all lead to regionalization. In fact, over the past 2 years, majority of the multinational firms actually have relocated their production near to the main manufacturing site, primarily to avoid travel restrictions and delay in supplies. Okay, so that's everything for today's lecture. Thank you for coming up. Looking forward to seeing you on Thursday. Okay?